welcome to another episode of Leadership Lessons. My guest today is Pastor Nick Sandefur, and I am so excited about this episode. Nick's a good friend. The Lord's really used him in Kentucky in lots of ways, and Nick's going to share advice that every pastor needs to hear. Nick, thank you for joining Leadership Lessons.
Hey, thanks for having me, Todd.
Let me tell you about Nick. So Nick Sandefur serves as senior pastor of Porter Memorial Baptist Church in Lexington, Kentucky. He has served KBC churches for 35 years, including Edgewood and Hopkinsville, and even led them through a relocation. Most pastors never experience that, but Nick did it there. Nick served on the KBC Mission Board staff as a regional consultant in Northern Kentucky. He's been married for 34 years to his wife, Kelly. They have two adult daughters, Jesse and Karis, and Nick also serves on the executive committee of the SBC and is an avid golfer. So let's just jump right in with these questions. Nick, tell us how you came to faith in Jesus and then ended up being called to ministry.
All right. Well, I'm from Western Kentucky. I was raised by two great parents who loved me dearly. They weren't born again, though. I went to church on Easter, maybe Christmas, a couple of times a year max. I went to a lot more bowling alleys than I did Bible school. But an 80-year-old couple in Henderson County, Kentucky at Cache Creek Baptist Church invited me to attend the church. And at the time they invited me, there might have been 40 in Sunday school and 60 or 70 in church. And over a couple of years, the gospel was just preached faithfully by a man named Scott Ford. Okay. One day I gave my heart to Jesus. A couple of weeks later, I was baptized when I was 12, baptized at 13, saved at 12. And then I was called to preach a few years later when I was 16 years old. And Scott moved to a church near Owensboro and asked me as an 18-year-old young boy to come on staff and help him out. And I was honored and learned a ton. And at 21 years old, he told me, "Hey, you're ready to go preach, brother." And so God sent me out to preach. And besides a couple of years at the KBC, I've been senior pastor ever since I was 21 years old.
Nick, not everybody has an opportunity to serve under a guy like Scott Ford. Just speak briefly about his influence in your life, his tenure. Was it Maceo that he
was at Maceo for 30 plus years, and I can't speak highly enough about him. I miss him. He's gone to be with Jesus. He died when he was about 65 years old, when I was 50 years old. It was nice to be able to pick up the phone and call a guy who you knew loved you and who you knew walked with Jesus. He's faithful to love his congregation. He didn't get a lot of accolades, but so many pastors were called out of his ministry. And there's so many of us who God just used him to teach us to serve, to love, to hold the Bible in high regard, and to take the calling of pastor incredibly seriously. And I'm eternally grateful for Scott's ministry.
When someone like that pours into your life, you receive the benefit of all of their hard-earned lessons in many cases, and then you're doing that for others as well. So that's great, just a great story. We're going to talk about how to help a church thrive. So let's define some terms. What does a thriving church look like in your mind?
Well, I mean, now obviously you've got the growing numerically, the meeting budget, baptizing, those things, those outward metrics aren't bad things. I use them to help guide me. But what I really want to look like is an Acts 2 church. I believe the river is purest at its source. And so you want to be centered around the Word of God like they were with the apostles' teaching. You want to be dependent upon God as they were meeting together and praying. They were trying to accomplish things that were beyond them, just trying to fulfill the Great Commission. They seem to be unified around the gospel, and that's what I want our church to be, a people who just really love Jesus. Yeah. I think in a thriving church like the early church, there's an anticipation. When a church is thriving, there's just something about people want to be there because they believe God's going to show up when they gather together. I think people are also trying to move people into their fellowship when a church is thriving. What I found is Baptists especially love their church. And when it's doing well, they really want to tell people about their church. And so a church that's thriving gives them something to talk about. I think a thriving church is also intergenerational because they're able to reach a lot of people. And there's something about intergenerational ministry that's essential for what I believe biblical discipleship is. Older people pouring into younger people continuing to pour into those who will follow them. And so, and then I think a thriving church also is a reflection of the community makeup.
Okay.
and whether that's racial, educational, economic. So I guess if I were to boil it down to three things, I would say a thriving church is a church that has a story to tell, it has relational culture, and it has some clear next steps of what do you do next, and how do I move in, and how do I serve and become a part. And so that's kind of what I think of with a thriving church.
That's exciting. I love especially what you said about folks want to invite people. I'm experiencing that in the church where my membership is. I don't get to go very often, but it's an exciting season right now, and I've been part of churches like that. So, I mean, that's kind of where Porter is. It feels like right now. So, tell us a little bit about Porter Memorial, where you currently serve. How long have you been there? How have you seen the church kind of grow and change during the time that you've historically great church, but how have you seen them grow and change during your time with them?
Yeah. Well, Porter is a legacy church. It was a plant of First Baptist in Lexington. It has a 117-year history. We're in the third location of the church. This church was built about 55 years ago as they relocated from closer to downtown Lexington. They've been a flagship of the convention probably in the late 1990s. They probably had the largest attendance one of those years. Theologically, been incredibly strong through the years. Inerrancy has always been a part of who they are. The pastor before me was excellent at making disciples. They had lots of strong disciples, sent out great pastors. That's probably his greatest legacy. There's probably 35 to 40 men who serve churches around the convention, and a lot of them in Kentucky. They're a program-driven church. A lot of churches that are established for a long time, they have programs. Some of ours right now have been in place for well over 30 years. We have a large physical plant. There's 110,000 square feet here. Our worship for years and years and years was a fairly traditional Southern Baptist worship. It is moved even before I got here to a blended service, and but we've continued to hold a blended service here where we have a choir and an orchestra, but a praise band, and we're pretty eclectic in our music selections. We can go all the way to a very contemporary song to an a cappella hymn, and that's just who we are, and we like that, and we want to be that. Before, church is church. Porter's had great seasons and hard seasons, and when I arrived, they'd been through a sluggish season. They lost over 900 in average attendance from their heyday.
Wow.
And staff was about 60% of the budget, and they were debt poor. We owed more than 2 times our budget in debt on a land, and our building had over $4 million additional dollars in deferred maintenance.
Wow. So
we were in a pretty deep hole, probably about an $8 million debt with a $2 million budget. And so it was pretty tough. So when I arrived in 2016 in the fall, the church they loved their former pastor, and he loved them. And like I said, he made incredible disciples, and God had bigger plans for him and moved him to another setting. But we had an interim period where the interim really set the stage for me to come in, talked about changes would probably be coming, and they were ready for that. And one of the things that I had to change was they had to change perception about themselves.
Yeah.
When I might have been the first person to tell them that they had dropped in average attendance, I kind of brought the ACPs out. Of course, that's what we did as regional consultants.
Yeah.
Hey, here's some of your realities.
Current reality. It doesn't tell the whole story, but it does tell a story. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so we had to get them to see the issues, and then we started addressing them. And I kind of had 3 things that I really wanted to make a difference on. And one of them was finances, one of them was facility, and the other was staffing. That was a large focus. And I believe a healthy church tries to keep their staffing under 50%. I think it's just a good story. And we were well into our 60%. And so that was a challenge. We did that mainly through just either people retiring or moving on, but we've been able to get our staff down under 50%. Our actual debt is even down to it's down over $2.5 million. I believe that we'll pay our debt off if there's some events that could happen that would pay it off quickly, but if they don't happen, I believe we'll pay our debt off in the next 3 or 4 years regardless, and all of our deferred maintenance is gone. and our renovation, our building's almost completely updated inside. In fact, by the end of 2025, every bit of our interior renovation will have taken place. But our growth has been exciting. Some of it, anytime you get a new preacher, there's curiosity, and we've had some of that. There's also some people who left because we got a new preacher.
Those both ways.
Yeah, it does. I mean, preaching's kind of like mama's cooking. Some people like it, some people don't. And, but the last few years, especially since COVID, we've really taken off in our college ministry. Mm-hmm. And our young professionals, and that's been really exciting to see. And God's just doing a movement in Kentucky Baptist churches in Lexington in general. There's 4 or 5 of our churches that have incredibly strong college ministries, and I'm grateful for that. Probably my favorite thing that's going on in the church is just the unity that seems to be in our body. We're doing something called 2x2 groups, which is kind of a next step from life group, which is Sunday school. And those 2x2 groups are just small groups where people meet off location 1 hour a week. They've committed to reading a chapter of the Bible a day, and then they get together and talk about it and pray. And it was my sneaky way of wanting them to become friends with people in the church. And so after 6 months, I got to make 4 new friends.
That's good.
And we've gone from, I think we had like 40 people the first semester last summer. Then when the fall, we ended up having like 125, and now I think we got 240 people in our 2x2 groups, and it's becoming one of the most meaningful days of my life, of my week, whenever we do that. And our church has grown. I mean, we've doubled in attendance.
So let me jump in there at that. Let me jump in at that point. So give us just by the numbers attendance. Okay. When you've been there, you said it. I missed it. How many? 6 years? How many years?
8 years.
8 years. Okay. Attendance when you got there, attendance now, and then budget when you got there and budget now.
Okay. Attendance when I arrived, the 9 months before I arrived, the average attendance was about 730 to 740. Okay. Those 9 months before I arrived. The attendance now, we had 1,600 the last 2 weeks. Okay. I think our ACP last year was in the 12 somethings, and we've seen a substantial growth the last 2 years of a couple hundred each year, and that looks to be continuing. Budget, we were 198. Mm-hmm. With some special offerings that got included, we would hit the 2 million mark, but it was right at 2 million. And we believe we're getting ready to set a budget for the next year, and it's going to be somewhere between 3.4 and 3.7.
Wow, it's incredible.
Will be our budget. Okay. Yeah, God's been incredibly gracious to us there. So
I love it. I love it, Nick, that you picked out the things that need to be addressed. There's 100 things you could have done, but I'm sure through prayer and observation and input, you settled on finances, on the building, the facility, and then on the staff. So let's move from Porter to a couple of general things just about helping another church. The folks that would listen in. My daily prayer for KBC is that every church will be a thriving church, every leader a cared for leader. What are some basic strategies? God builds His church. We know that, and we're grateful that He does. But what are some basic strategies that can put a church in a position to thrive in your mind?
Well, one of them I think is every church ought to evaluate regularly.
Okay.
I mean, you can get so store blind to what's going on, yep. But visitors aren't store blind, mm-hmm. and visitors are the key to a church thriving. I mean, if you don't have new life in the church, it's right. just going to. Somebody said one time years ago, and I don't remember who it was, but church is like a grease pole. You're either climbing or sliding. And if you don't have people coming in, that's just going to be the way it goes.
And so folks may not even think about that, but there's a natural attrition rate in every church, probably something like 10%. It's higher in some areas, maybe a little lower in others, but there's a number of people exiting a church every year for death or relocation, whatever it is. So there must be new life coming in.
Absolutely. And so I keep track of that. I mean, how many visitors do we have per week? Kind of what's our average in that, and what's kind of retention rate in our church, and how are we doing in that? And I mean, that's something we make sure that we talk about. Have we reached out to these folks? Are we paying attention to visitors? Are you meeting people you don't know on Sunday morning? So that's something I would absolutely tell people. Use the 15 minutes before and after church for God's glory, and your church is good. Mm-hmm. I love learning people's names. Everybody thinks I'm great at it. you know what I did when I first came to Porter? I had the ministry assistant here take their most recent directory, which was not that recent, laminate it, make flashcards for me, and the month between my trial sermon and my start date, or the weeks before my trial sermon and my start date, I just every night went through those flip cards. And when I would learn a stack of them, I would move on it. But I know their name, and it's so amazing how much more receptive people are to the Word of God when they hear it from somebody they believe knows them and cares about them.
That's really good.
Yeah. And so I'd use those 15 minutes for God's glory. I would tell you that facilities matter. I mean, Americans are first impression type people. And, your context is going to dictate what that first impression needs to look like. But do what you can. We had leaks that we were catching in green trash cans in our preschool hallway when it would rain. We probably had 1,000 ceiling tiles that were damaged, missing, or water damaged and around our building. And that just, no matter how much you clean, you can't overcome some of those things. Right. So we tried to make the difference that we could. Now, we were limited on funds, but we tried to make the difference. And I would tell you, do the same thing. Look around and do what you can. I'd also tell a pastor that to create a thriving church, you got to have a vision. If a pastor doesn't have a vision of a better future, and I'm not talking about like 10 specific things you have to do, but you got to believe that God could do something where you're at. If you don't believe that God can't do anything with your people, and even if it's one salvation or 10 gospel conversations or one Bible school or one community ministry, if you don't believe your congregation can really do something for God's glory, I would ask God to either give me vision or put me in another place where I believe
vision is just simply, this is where we're going. We're trying to get here.
It's absolutely. I think culture of authenticity is really important for people to have as too. You just are. I think I've never gone wrong with people knowing Nick. And I mean, there's a lot of people who know me who might not like Nick, but they like the fact that they know Nick. That they're not guessing, is that who he is or not? And
you're just transparent. You are who you are, and they hear that and see it when you preach.
Yes, I hope so. And then nothing energizes a church like baptism. So, man, I would throw some major energy into outreach and evangelism, because there's just something about when the baptistry waters flow, the energy increases in the church. And obviously God's the only one who can save, but I've just found that the more I talk about Jesus and tell people how to be saved, the more people get saved.
That's what happens. And you're seeing a pretty good number of adults now come to faith at Porter.
Yeah. I mean, and that's been amazing. We've not been the leading baptismal church in the convention, and there's a lot of factors in that, but I don't want to make excuses. I mean, we're in a place filled with lost people, just like everybody else in Kentucky, and God is just doing a movement. And I think you and I talked about this several times. Like, I was watching churches, and it wasn't so you could brag about baptism. There's just something about seeing adults saved and college students saved. And I started begging the Lord, and we've got a couple of people on our staff who just really are faithful evangelists and good at inviting people. And we probably baptized 20 plus adults in the last 3.5 months.
That's incredible.
And that's incredible. It's unusual for us, because we probably didn't baptize 30 people last year, counting children.
That's incredible.
So God's doing a movement that we can only credit him for.
But Nick, I love it that you said you reached a point personally of crying out to God about that, and some others did as well. I think that's good news for any pastor to hear. If you're not happy about the way things are going evangelistically in the church, then man, cry out to God and trust that you might be part of the solution. He might want to do something in your own heart and life. Hey Nick, I want to use a portion of our time to talk about leadership. I view you as a very effective leader. I think you know that. The Lord's used you in lots of different settings. You've helped churches do things that they weren't doing before. The relocation at Edgewood and Hopkinsville was a really big deal, and I think I remember there were 3 votes to get to the final vote that was able to make that move, and you hung in there with the church. I want to ask you some questions. So being an effective pastor requires a lot of you. There's a cost that goes with leadership. How do you take care of yourself? What do you do to make sure that you don't fall into a pit of burnout?
Whew, this was a hard one for me to answer because I'm not the best at taking care of myself. But balance and care for my family and myself. Uh, well, one, you got to spend time with the Lord every day. I mean, that's what fills my tank. I can tell when I'm working in my own power, and I can tell when I'm walking with Jesus. And nothing fills my tank like walking with Him. And so I think that's the first question I'd ask a guy if he's suffering from burnout. Are you spending any time at the feet of Jesus? Yeah. Are you in His Word every day? I do believe in taking time off. I like to golf, like you said. I don't golf nearly as much as I used to, but I do like to golf. I'm not the best at taking my days off, but if I'll sneak out and find an afternoon to play golf once a week or so, and when it's golfing season, weather's good, and then when I like hunting, and so turkey season and deer season. I'll find some time doing that, enjoy that. So, that's what I do. I'm an extrovert. Yeah. So sitting at home by myself is hard. My wife works outside the home, so that's why I come in on my days off. It's not as much about I'm so busy. It's more about I don't like just sitting at home alone.
Yeah, that energizes you. So you're pastoring a growing church. As the church grows, the demands on you grow. What's a boundary or two that you've had to set to make sure that you are able to focus on those most important things that a senior leader needs to focus on?
Yeah, I don't give my phone number out to everybody because I don't know how not to answer it.
Yep.
If people text me, I feel a very strong impulse to answer immediately, and it causes anxiety in the moment. Yeah. So I don't give my phone out to everybody. I also only set my appointments through my ministry assistant. Okay. Simply because she knows I'm always going to say yes, and she will give me some good guidance as to, hey, you've got this, this, and this. Are you sure you can pull that off? And if I'm not standing in front of somebody, I might say, oh, I don't know if I can. I also try to communicate realities to our congregation. I don't do it often, but there are times that I'll say, if everybody in here called me once a year, it would take me 3 phone calls a day to talk to you and 3 years to get it done. And that's if I work 7 days a week. So, there's kind of some boundaries that I try to set. And that could be at a smaller church as well, a smaller attendance. You just got to communicate realities. There's so many hours, and I only have to preach once a week. There's a lot of guys who have to preach 3+ work a job. And so you just have to communicate those realities. This is the time I've got. I'll do everything I can to love on you, but I also got to love on my family. And
that's good. You have to lead there too. You have to lead in every area, and even sometimes in dealing with a pastor's pay, a pastor has to give leadership in that area as well.
Yeah, especially if you're on your own. Yep. You don't have anybody going to bat for you in that. And one of the things I just say to guys is I say yes as often as I can. So when I need to say no, the people know it's not a lack of love.
That's really good. Yeah, that's really good. You start with yes, and you may need to move to a no. So Nick, who is one of your favorite biblical leaders?
Well, I thought of two, and Paul's missional mind, I just love that. And what I really love about Paul is his ability to adapt. Okay. I just didn't see a cookie cutter method. Some people want to kind of create something formulaic in Pauline literature. I just don't see it. I see him adapting, becoming all things so that people might be saved, telling Timothy, here's how you need to handle Ephesus. But my real favorite leader in the Bible is Nehemiah. Okay. I love Nehemiah.
Why Nehemiah?
Compassion. I mean, just brokenhearted over the situation of the people, loyalty to his people. I mean, he's in the king's court. He's got a cushy job, but just a loyalty to his people, boldness man, God's called me to this. I got to do it. Balancing work and faith and wisdom. Yep. I mean, that's just, you see it in Nehemiah, persistence. Yeah. And I think one of the things I loved is he had a long view of his ministry. Repopulation is not something that you see instant success in. That takes time, building culture, getting people back on the right page spiritually. And then he doesn't gloss over problems. I mean, he leans into conflict. Yes. And he just works his plan. I mean, he's building a wall and repopulating the city, and that's what God called him to do, and that's what he did.
He didn't tell everybody what he was doing. He kept a lot of things in his heart before he said them out loud. And every pastor ought to read the book of Nehemiah with an eye on steps to leadership. his vision didn't come from going to somebody's conference. It came from crying out to God, and he didn't even cry out to God with an intention on having a vision. He just cried out to God over a broken situation, and you could tell by the end of chapter 1, God's given Nehemiah a vision. He knows, he hasn't said it out loud yet, but he knows what God's calling him to do. It's an incredible book of the Bible. I love that. All right, so let me ask you this. What did you have to learn about yourself to lead more effectively? So lead yourself before you can lead others. You can't lead others till you lead yourself. What did you have to learn about Nick?
Yeah, I have learned that I had a natural tendency to act without information.
Okay.
Without enough information. I'm a very intuitive leader. You know that about me.
Yep.
And I think it's a gift from the Lord.
Yep.
But that can make me think I'm automatically right. And God has protected me a lot of my ministry for myself. And he's used failure to teach me to ask for other people's perspective. I'm not really looking for popular opinion, but just making a well-informed decision.
Yeah.
I don't always agree when people share me. In fact, share their opinion with me. Most of the time I don't if it's different than mine. But I've learned to leverage more perspectives. And I've had to shift from doing ministry to equipping ministers.
Okay.
And that's just a shift I've had to make, and that's hard for me because I'm a pretty hands-on person. And we're kind of in the process of that at Porter right now. And, so that's stuff I've had to learn the hard way a little bit.
One of the things I would think would be a strength about you and a leadership team is that you would welcome a healthy disagreement or even a healthy conflict, that you would really value, if someone pushes back, they're going to get an instant answer back, but you're going to get a better outcome if there is a little bit of a back and forth.
I love healthy back and forth. I'm not sure my team loves it as much as I love it,
right?
Because I'm pretty aggressive, but I don't. They never have to be threatened by me being mad that they shared their opinion.
Yeah.
As long as they can live with me not agreeing with it all the time.
That's good. Nick, what is one leadership lesson that you had to learn the hard way?
Yeah. I can get so focused on the mission that I assume the people beside me are okay.
Okay. Can you explain that, or do you have an example?
Yeah, I can. I've had to learn the hard way that leadership just isn't about vision. You have to see the people around you, and I can be charging and so energized by my vision.
Yeah.
And I've shared it with them twice or three times. They ought to be wanting to work 70, 80 hours a week like me.
Right.
And the truth is, not everybody's wired like me.
Yeah.
And I'm still learning how not to let my patterns become expectations.
That's good. That's really good.
And we're all different gifting, different pace. And I've pushed leaders sometimes to the point where they were hurt, and I didn't even know they were hurt because I was just doing my thing. Mm-hmm. And so I've had to learn that the hard way, and I think I'm better today than I was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I hope so. I hope I'm better in 3 years than I am now.
Some very effective leaders are go-getters, hard chargers. They move at a pretty fast clip. Others are much more methodical. They have a much slower pace and produce really excellent work. What have you done to make room on your team? You have a pretty good staff now. You're not a single staff pastor. You have been. You've done that role as well. How have you learned to make room for those folks who are different than you, to make them know it's okay for them to go the way they go?
When they learn my heart that I really am okay with them being the way they are, they communicate with me what they need.
Yeah.
And I've had to communicate with them when I'm verbally processing and when I'm demanding.
Okay.
But I hire to my weaknesses. Some people hire to their strengths. I hire to my weaknesses. Mm-hmm. And we could go into that. But I know we're running on.
So you'll say something to them like, "Look, I'm just thinking out loud right now. This is processing. This is not a plan."
I did that today with somebody, almost verbatim.
Well, it's important to communicate it, because some folks, your hint is their command. I mean, if they hear you say something, they're going to go do it. All right. If you had one piece of advice to give to young leaders, what would it be?
Spend time with the person a little farther along.
Yeah, that's good.
We talked about Scott Ford when I started. Find a mentor and actually listen to them. Don't find a mentor that you're trying to use for a reference.
Right.
Find a mentor who you're trying to learn. Hey, how did you navigate this? Hey, how did you handle this in your heart? And don't just meet for coffee. Ask them about their mistakes, their regret, what they'd do differently. Man, they're a mentor's experience who's been in pastoral ministry, because so few people understand what we go through. Their experience can save you years of learning the hard way.
Absolutely. Hey, Nick, I really appreciate your friendship. I value your ministry at Porter, and I love this conversation. Thank you so much for joining Leadership Lessons.
I appreciate you, brother. God bless you. Thanks for your work.
The support for the Kentucky Baptist Convention and all its gospel advancing ministries comes from the generous and voluntary giving of KBC churches through the cooperative program. If you'd like to know more about the KBC and our missions and ministries, go to kybaptist.org. And thank you for listening to Leadership Lessons. Thanks for listening to Leadership Lessons. An audio podcast of this program is available on both Apple and Android devices. The Kentucky Baptist Convention was created by churches, for churches, to help churches reach Kentucky and the world for Christ. For more information about the KBC and the cooperative program, which fuels our ministry, go to kybaptist.org. We'll see you next time on Leadership Lessons.